Hey guys, welcome to Terrifying Tales. In this video we are going to represent you a story about Don't Turn Around 2 Inches. Winter had descended upon the city. It was commonplace for the streets to be deserted when the winter chill came rolling in, but a force far stronger than the cold was keeping the city's population hidden from sight. A thick fog blanketed everything in sight. It had curiously rolled in during the fall and never went away. It was at about that same time that many unexplained deaths began to take place. In the distance a dog barked angrily. It was only able to get out a few barks, however, before letting out an anguished yelp. Silence then quickly returned to the landscape. A woman stumbled her way down an empty street. She was quite frail and looked near death. "Please," she said in a voice that was only barely audible. "Someone help us. We have no food. Please, someone help us." A few curtains opened and curious residents peeked outside, but none of them had any intentions of assisting the woman. Safety wasn't even assured for those inside their own homes, so it was a near act of suicide to go outside. "Please, my children are starving," cried the woman. Every time the woman looked at one of the open curtains, the person on the other side immediately shut them. "Please help us," said the woman. A bitterly cold wind swept across the woman, bringing her to an immediate halt. She froze in her tracks when it became painfully evident that someone was standing behind her. "Hey, Miyuki-chan," said Hannah, a most sinister smile upon her face. "Don't turn around." When a hand came to rest on the woman's shoulder, she made the most horrific of mistakes by turning around. The scream she let out was so dreadful that it sent a chill down the spine of those who had the misfortune of hearing it. In one of the less popular areas of Tokyo, a dilapidated building housed Super Unexplainable Paranormal, one of Japan's least popular magazines that covered the paranormal and other unexplained phenomena. On this day, the chief editor, Mr. Yamagata, was looking over one of his newest reporter's most recent stories while the nervous employee stood before his desk. The speed in which Yamagata would read the work of his employees made them assume he had made his mind up as to whether the story would be published by the time he had finished with the title. Yamagata dropped the stack of papers onto his desk. The look on his face said more than words ever could. "Your story doesn't have that something that this magazine prides itself on," he said. "What do you mean?" asked the young man. "Our stories grab our readers by the throat," said Yamagata, as he firmly grasped at the air as if he was grabbing a real neck, "and they don't let them go until the very last word. This story of yours wouldn't even leave a mark. I want our readers to feel like they've just survived a life or death situation." "So you didn't like the story about the woman in the woods?" asked the reporter. Yamagata grabbed a nearby pen and frantically began writing on the stack of papers on his desk. "Change the woman to a giant rat and send it upstairs so we can get it to press," he said. The reporter retrieved his story from Yamagata's desk and took his leave. When he was alone in his office, Yamagata opened his desk and pulled out a bottle of whiskey. "Where would this magazine be without me?" he wondered out loud. As he poured himself a very full glass, Yamagata's phone began ringing. Even with his favorite liquor beckoning him to drink it down, Yamagata reluctantly answered the phone. "Yes, this is Yamagata," he said. "Ah, Mr. Yamagata," said the man on the other end, who had the same cheerful disposition as someone who was calling one of their closest friends. "It's Mr. Ito." "Ito," said Yamagata, who was less than enthused to be speaking to his greatest rival. He made no further hesitation and drank down his whiskey. "How are things going down there?" asked Ito. "Things are going amazing," replied Yamagata. "We're running the stories that your magazine is afraid to touch." "Is that so?" asked Ito. "Did you happen to see our latest issue? We received a lot of praise for our article about the carnivorous hot spring." Yamagata began laughing. "Pure fluff piece," he exclaimed. "Did you see our latest issue? People are still talking about our vampire mayor story." "I couldn't find any copies of your most recent issue," said Ito. "I heard they had to be pulled from shelves because your vampire mayor threatened to sue you for libel. You couldn't find any copies because they all sold out, and you can't be sued for libel if you never name the mayor you're talking about." "Still tiptoeing on the edge of what's legal and what's not, I see," said Ito. Yamagata poured himself another glass of whiskey and drank it quickly. "You never call unless you want something. So you can stop beating around the bush and tell me." "Well," said Ito, who suddenly went silent, "rumor has it that you sent some of your reporters to investigate the dead city." "Dead city?" asked Yamagata before breaking into what could be described as very nervous laughter. "There's no such thing as the dead city. It would be a waste of time and resources to send my reporters to investigate something that everyone already knows doesn't exist. I have a reliable source at my magazine that says you sent 3 of your people to cover the story," said Ito. "And who might this so-called reliable source of yours be?" asked Yamagata. Miss Tanaka, one of our cover artists, replied Ito. She used to date Mr. Takahashi. I believe he's the photographer you sent on this assignment. That damn Takahashi never could keep his damn mouth shut, exclaimed Yamagata. I told him not to tell anyone about this. I knew I couldn't trust him. I think Takahashi was trying to impress Miss Tanaka in some sort of attempt at winning her back. I suppose the cat is out of the bag, isn't it? Said Yamagata. It can't be helped now, but there's no way you can get a team to the dead city in time to beat us to the punch. By the time you do, my all-stars will be back. Moron, exclaimed Ito. Ha, gasped Yamagata. You think I just now came up with the idea of sending people to investigate the dead city? Asked Ito. I sent my best reporters to cover this story over 3 weeks ago. Liar, exclaimed Yamagata. If you sent them 3 weeks ago, then why haven't you published the story yet? Because they never came back. Ito then went dead silent. What do you mean they never came back? Asked Yamagata. We lost contact with them shortly after they arrived at the dead city. We've called their cell phones hundreds of times, but to no avail. They're gone. Then why haven't they been reported missing on the news? Asked Yamagata. The story would be on every television station and in every newspaper. The police are sweeping it under the rug, said Ito. That's our best guess. If word got out about this place, then every wannabe reporter and paranormal investigator would flock to the dead city and end up just like our reporters. You must contact your people and tell them to come back now, before it's too late. Yamagata was at a rare loss for words. I'll call you back, he said before abruptly hanging up. After pouring himself another glass of whiskey and chugging it down quickly, Yamagata retrieved his cell phone. He frantically scrolled through his contacts until he came upon Izumi Yoshida, his best reporter and one of the 3 people he had sent to the dead city. Come on, Yoshida, said Yamagata. Pick up. After a few rings, someone on the other end picked up. Yoshida, are you all right? How are the others? Did you reach the dead city? There was no response on the other end, only static. Yoshida, though he was alone, Yamagata couldn't help but feel a presence behind him. He quickly looked back but found no one there. At that moment the call cut off. Hannah stood within the smothering fog. A most sinister grin graced her lips. Not strong enough, she said, clenching her hand into a fist, but I will be. Despite its age and numerous mechanical failings, the company van had made it from Tokyo to the place now known as the Dead City. Ace photographer Kenji Takahashi was behind the wheel. And now that the trio had reached their destination, he was forced to drive at a far safer speed than he had used on the freeways and backcountry roads. Being within the city limits was one reason for the safer speed, but a blinding fog was a far greater reason to slow the van down. I told you I would get us here in one piece, said Kenji. Barely, said an annoyed Izumi, who had played co-pilot on the journey from the front passenger seat. You wouldn't listen to my directions and got us lost twice. But I got us here, didn't I? Asked Kenji. You're very lucky there were no police on the road, said a voice from the back seat. I can never do anything right in your eyes, can I, college boy? Asked Kenji. Seated in the back was Shin Iwata, the only other reporter at the tabloid with near the credentials of Izumi. I only told you once that I went to college, said Shin. And that was 4 years ago on the day I started working at this magazine. And I only told you because you asked me. And you never let me live the fact down that I never got to go to college, said Kenji, who was doing his best to act sullen. I came from hard-working parents. They worked all day in the coal mine to provide a better life for me and my little sister. They wanted to send us to college but couldn't afford it. Your father worked at a bank, and your mother was a teacher, said Izumi. And you don't have any siblings. Kenji's demeanor immediately changed to far more cheerful. I can see why you're our #1 best reporter, he said. That's why they send me to cover the important stories, said Izumi, whose smile stretched from ear to ear. I knew all that stuff about him too, Shin said under his breath. A pair of wooden barriers up ahead prompted Kenji to slow the van down and eventually come to a stop. Trying to keep out the tourists I see, remarked Kenji, before looking to the backseat. Come on, let's go move them. Why do I have to help move them? Asked Shin. Because they're too heavy for me to move on my own, replied Kenji. What, you want me to ask Izumi to help me? Fine, said Shin before reluctantly climbing out of the van. I'll call Yamagata, said Izumi. Now that we're inside the city, maybe we'll get a better signal. Izumi retrieved her cell phone and attempted to call Yamagata. The call dropped immediately after she had dialed the number. The call still won't go through, she said. Despite having been left alone, Izumi couldn't help but feel as if someone was now sitting in the backseat. She looked behind her but found no one. Kenji and Shin returned a short time later. Did you talk to Yamagata? Asked Kenji. The call wouldn't go through, said Izumi. We'll probably get a signal once we're deeper in the city, said Shin. That's usually where they put the cell towers. As the trio traveled down the road, they couldn't help but notice how there were no people outside, but there were a lot of people peeking through curtains at them. It might be hard to get an interview if none of these people ever leave their house, said Izumi. We could go door to door and see if anyone wants to talk to us, said Shin. I don't think that would be a good idea, said Izumi. We should keep driving and see if we can find someone. Maybe they're all afraid of the fog, said Kenji, making a face at Izumi. Ooh? Izumi chuckled. A figure suddenly appeared in the road up ahead. Watch out, exclaimed Shin. Kenji immediately slammed on the brakes, sending everybody violently lurching forward. What is it? Gasped Izumi. I saw someone, claimed Shin. It was a girl. She was wearing a school uniform. There's no one there, exclaimed Kenji. I saw someone, said Shin. I swear, Kenji glared at Shin before putting the van in park. Wait here, he said before going outside. Izumi looked back at Shin and motioned for him to join Kenji outside. Shin frantically began shaking his head. Hello, is there someone out here? Asked Kenji. Sorry about almost running you over. What sounded like approaching footsteps prompted Kenji to quickly turn around. No one was there. With the coast being clear, Kenji made his way back to the van. There's nothing out there, he said as he approached the door. An unseen force then pulled him down and out of sight from the others. Kenji-kun, exclaimed Izumi. Where did he go? Asked Shin, pressing his face against the window in a desperate attempt to find Kenji. In the blink of an eye, Kenji appeared at the other side of the van, his face pressed against the window. Kenji-kun, screamed Izumi. The look of horror on Kenji's face suddenly turned into a most sly smile. He then began laughing hysterically. What? Gasped Shin. You two should have seen the looks on your faces, said Kenji, who was now calmly walking back to his seat. Jerk, exclaimed Izumi, who immediately began pelting Kenji with a barrage of punches once he had sat back down. I'm sorry, said Kenji, trying vainly to shield himself with his arms. I couldn't pass up such a perfect opportunity. This will come up in your next performance review, I'm sure of it, said Shin. Yamagata wouldn't dare fire me, said Kenji. I use all of my own equipment. I save him a ton of money. Just drive, said Izumi, her arms now folded. Aye aye, Captain, said Kenji before shifting the van into drive and continuing on the journey. When the van was completely out of sight, Hannah emerged from the smothering fog. The smile on her face was more than enough to show that sinister thoughts were on her mind. The trio arrived at a house that looked to have been abandoned for quite some time. Despite all of the houses they had seen in the city looking abandoned, this one looked like it had been let go far earlier than any of the others. The weeds had laid claim to the front garden, and the exterior of the house was covered in dirt and algae. This is the place, said Izumi, scanning the house from outside the front gate. Shin was scribbling notes down in his notebook. So this is where Dr. Nishimura lives, he said. I tried as hard as I could to get him to work with me on several stories but never could. Maybe the story should be about this house, said Kenji, taking pictures of it. It looks haunted. He was a brilliant man, said Izumi. A bit of a recluse at the end, from what I understand. She opened the front gate and entered the yard. Should we be doing this? Asked Shin. It couldn't hurt to knock on the door and see if anyone moved in after he died, said Izumi. When Izumi knocked, the door gradually opened from the force. Izumi looked back at the others. Trespassing is a crime, said Shin. Look around, said Kenji. There's no one here. God is basically telling us to go into that house. No god would have anything to do with this place, said Shin, who quickly began jotting down more notes. Izumi timidly entered the house. Hello, she said. Is anybody here? Sorry for intruding, but the door wasn't locked. Shin and Kenji followed. What's so special about this guy anyway? Asked Kenji, who was now snapping pictures of the inside of the house. Before he died, he was investigating the deaths that were taking place in the city, said Izumi. Why didn't we cover this story? Asked Kenji. Seems right up our alley. Police said it was the work of a serial killer, replied Shin. They had no intention of admitting the deaths were supernatural. The trio ventured further into the house and discovered that no one had lived there for at least a few months. A layer of dust was covering everything in sight, and the air reeked of mildew. We should look for Dr. Nishimura's research, said Izumi. That could shed some light into what's happening. Behind one of the doors the trio came to was an office. Well, I guess we'd better start searching, said Izumi. Everyone took to a different part of the office and began scanning the numerous files and newspapers to find any information on the mysterious deaths that were taking place. After only a few minutes, Izumi made a breakthrough. I think I found it, said Izumi, showing off a red folder. What's it say? Asked Shin. It looks as if Dr. Nishimura documented all of the deaths that he believed were linked to this case, replied Izumi. The first deaths were a couple of high school girls. He couldn't find out what their names were or what school they attended because of privacy laws, but Dr. Nishimura says they were definitely the first. Shin picked up a blue folder that was lying underneath the red one Izumi had found. The next two deaths were a husband and wife. They were found dead in their home by their own daughter. How awful that must have been. Izumi then continued reading. Listen to this. One of the victims was a man named Yamamoto. He was a detective who worked the cases of the first few deaths. You think he was getting close to finding the killer and had to be dealt with? Asked Kenji. That sounds like a possibility, replied Izumi. It seems all the information we're looking for was in this folder. No reason for us to stay here any longer. Yeah, we should get going, said Kenji. This place is making me nervous. Izumi had to nudge Shin to get his attention as he was focused intently on the notes he was reading in the blue folder. The trio piled into their van and headed out shortly thereafter. I don't feel right about taking these notes without permission, said Izumi. It can't be helped, said Kenji. That place had been empty for who knows how long. I think the good doctor would want those notes to be found and put to good use. What is so fascinating about what you found? Izumi asked Shin, who would barely lift his head up to look at the others because of how captivated he was. This story that Dr. Nishimura was working on, said Shin. It seems there's a haunted cliff located somewhere in this city. We didn't come here for that, said Izumi. But it's fascinating, replied Shin. If we come home with 2 stories instead of 1, we have to focus on one story at a time. We have to find where Yamamoto lived and hope he kept notes on this case outside of what he was keeping at his office. You think we should find the police station and snoop around there? Asked Kenji. It would be far too risky, replied Izumi. Snooping around an abandoned house is one thing, but breaking into a police station is something that I don't think even Yamagata would approve of. If only we had the names of those girls, said Kenji. Then we'd be able to figure out why they were the first. If our search comes up empty, might I suggest, said Shin, holding up his blue folder. I already told you we don't have time for that, said Izumi. She then directed her glare to Kenji. Do you even know where we're going? She asked. I don't know these roads, said Kenji. Plus the fog is making it hard for me to see. You're lucky I haven't driven us straight into a light pole. Izumi pulled out her cell phone. Still no signal, she said. You know where there might be a signal? Asked Shin. He then began pointing up. The higher we go, Are you trying to get us to go to that cliff? Asked Izumi. He has a point, said Kenji. If we can get to higher ground, then maybe we can get above this fog and get a signal. Izumi folded her arms and slumped in her seat. Fine, she said. But we're going only to find a better cell signal and that's it. The 3 arrived at the beach a short time later. Izumi's best strategy was to raise her phone above her head. I still can't get a signal, she said. We have to go higher, said Shin. How did I know you were going to suggest that? Said Izumi. The 3 followed a small trail that would lead them to the cliff that Shin so badly wanted to see. Upon reaching the top, Izumi raised her phone above her head. I'm still not getting a signal, she said. Izumi continued walking forward, but Shin grabbed her arm and stopped her. What is it? She asked. Shin said nothing and merely motioned for Izumi to look ahead. Standing near the cliff Shin had wanted to see was a girl. She had her back turned to the 3 so no one could tell if she was going to be friendly or hostile. Who is that? Whispered Kenji, before taking numerous pictures of the mysterious girl. I don't know, replied Izumi. It's not the same girl that jumped out in front of the van, said Shin. She's not dressed in a school uniform. Led by Izumi, the 3 cautiously made their way closer to the girl. They stopped when they felt they were a safe distance from her. Hello? Izumi said timidly. Might I ask who you are? The girl slowly turned around. My name is Sayuri, she said. Once the introductions had been made, Sayuri told the 3 her story. She first explained how she and her friends had committed a horrible prank that led to Shizuko's untimely death and then all of the horrors that followed. Sayuri had placed a single white lily at Shizuko's grave and was about to make her way to school when an eerily sudden gust of wind brought her to an immediate halt. Though she had seen no other visitors in the cemetery with her that morning, Sayuri knew she was no longer alone. Hey, Sayuri-chan, said a chillingly familiar voice. Before long, an incredibly cold white hand had come to rest on her shoulder. Don't turn around. Shaking visibly, Sayuri attempted to speak, but only desperate breaths escaped through her quivering lips. I bet you weren't expecting to see me again, were you? Asked Hana. Thought you had gotten rid of me, Hana, gasped Sayuri. That's right, said Hana. You always were the smart one. Sayuri closed her eyes and tears began to fall. Will this appease your anger? She asked. Will killing me allow you to pass to the other side? If so, then go ahead and do it. Hana began laughing. You really think once I kill you then all of this will be over, don't you? She asked. This won't be over until I say it's over. Sayuri opened her eyes. What do you mean? Killing you would be far too easy and far too kind, replied Hana. If I were to kill you now, then you wouldn't be able to see what I have planned for this miserable world. What? Gasped Sayuri. I'm going to kill as many people as I possibly can, replied Hana. It's what they deserve. Stupid Shizuko wanted revenge on those who wronged her, and I want the same. This entire world is to blame for what I've become. You can't, gasped Sayuri, pulling away from Hana and spinning around to face her. Hana, however, was nowhere to be found. And who's going to stop me? Asked Hana, once again placing a hand upon Sayuri's shoulder. You? Sayuri had no response to the challenge. You think there's some set of rules that a vengeful spirit has to abide by? Asked Hana. Well, I'm going to let you in on a little secret. There aren't any rules. I can do whatever I want. Hana then forcefully spun Sayuri around so the two could look into each other's eyes. Hana looked just as Sayuri remembered, down to the scowl that was always upon her face. Hana-chan, whispered Sayuri. Stupid Shizuko only made it seem like she could kill us only if we turned around, said Hana. The truth is, she was only doing that to give us enough time to realize we were about to die. I guess I'll give her credit for that. The fear that consumes a person moments before they die is incredible. Where is Shizuko now? Asked Sayuri. How the hell should I know where she is? Replied Hana. And why the hell should I care? She was stupid to spare you and kill the rest of us. You deserve to die the most. You pretended to be her friend, just like you did to me. No, said Sayuri, shaking her head. I never pretended to be friends with anyone. Shizuko was my friend, and so were you. Spare me your lies, said Hana. You were only friends with me so you could be popular. And you were only friends with Shizuko so you could feel good about yourself. What? Asked Sayuri. You could always make yourself feel better just by looking at Shizuko and telling yourself, at least I'm not her. No, that's not true, said Sayuri. People like you are the worst of them all, said Hana. And there are so many of you walking around out there. But after I'm done, there won't be any of your kind left. Sayuri grabbed Hana by the arms. Please, Hana-chan, don't do this, she said. Hana gave Sayuri a look that made the girl quickly let go of her. It's already too late, said Hana, slowly shaking her head. I've already begun. Everything that happens from this day on will be because of you. It's all going to be your fault. Please, don't, whimpered Sayuri. Tell me something, Sayuri-chan, said Hana. Before you left for school this morning, did you tell your parents that you loved them? The grim look on Hana's face was more than enough to prompt Sayuri to sprint from the cemetery and back home. Sayuri tried desperately to reach her parents on her cell phone, but neither of them was answering. Sayuri's frantic sprint got her home in only a few short minutes. She flew through the front door and called for her parents. Mom, Dad, she shouted. Sayuri rushed into the dining room and found her parents both lying motionless on the floor. Only moments earlier the family was enjoying breakfast at the table, but now everything was over. Dad, whimpered Sayuri, shaking his motionless body. She did the same with her mother, to no avail. Mom, with a cold wind blowing, Sayuri and the others had taken to the comfort of the van to listen to her story. Seeing how frail the girl looked, Izumi gave Sayuri a bag of chips to eat. As the weeks went on, more people started dying, said Sayuri. At first, people thought it was a serial killer, but there were so many victims that they ruled that out quickly. They also couldn't figure out how the victims died. There were no marks on them, but internally most of their bones had been broken. So Hana was doing what was done to her, said Izumi. Much like Shizuko had done with her victims, said Shin, who was scribbling notes down in his notebook. Their bodies had to be crushed just like hers was. This is too much to handle, said Kenji. Detective Yamamoto was put in charge of the investigation, said Sayuri. He was the detective who had handled Shizuko's case and then Nami and Aika's. He also interviewed me after my parents were killed. Yamamoto knew what had happened had something to do with Shizuko's death. So I told him the whole story. As crazy as my story was, he actually believed me. He didn't know how to end the killings or even how to approach his colleagues with this information, but he vowed he would do everything in his power to help me put an end to Hana. Sayuri then went. What happened next? Izumi asked eagerly. I went to the police station to talk to Yamamoto, said Sayuri, to see how the investigation was going, but they told me Yamamoto hadn't been to work in a few days. When they couldn't reach him by phone, they sent officers to his house, and that's where they found he had become another victim. How terrible, said Izumi. You lost your closest ally. I don't want to alarm anyone, said Kenji. But the sun is going down, we should find a place to stay for the night. As unsettling as the city was during the day, it became even more frightening at night. You can stay at my house, said Sayuri. The group arrived at Sayuri's house just as the sun began to sink below the horizon. With such a small amount of moonlight able to penetrate through the blinding fog, looking out the window made it seem as if the four were stranded in the middle of nowhere. "How fortunate we are," said Shin, scribbling down notes in his notebook. He and Kenji were given the living room couches to slumber on for the night, while Izumi got Sayuri's bed and Sayuri slept in her parents' room. "How are we fortunate?" asked Kenji. "We met the girl who can blow this story wide open," said Shin. "She might even be able to put an end to all this." "You heard her story," said Kenji. "She's practically to blame for everything that's happening, but we are fortunate in one aspect." "What might that be?" asked Shin. "While we're around her, that ghost won't come for us," insisted Kenji. "Hana is saving her for last, like some sort of dessert. She might just keep us alive. That's one way to look at things," said Shin. Izumi was, unsurprisingly, having much difficulty falling asleep. She tossed and turned for what seemed like hours before finally giving up. All Izumi could do was stare at the darkened bedroom and study the items within it. Sayuri's bedroom felt so cold and unwelcoming. Most teenagers would have bright colors throughout, and various other items that showed that a girl was calling that place her own. But this room had little more than the bare necessities. After her first encounter with the girl, Izumi could tell that Sayuri wasn't any kind of typical happy-go-lucky teenager. No girl could be at such a tumultuous time. But there was something about her that made it seem as if Sayuri had been that way long before those times had begun. Beside Sayuri's desk were two book bags. Remembering Sayuri's story from earlier in the day, Izumi realized one of the bags must have at one time belonged to Shizuko. With sleep being out of the question for the time being, Izumi climbed out of bed and went to the window. Through the fog, she thought she could see the silhouette of a person. After squinting, "What have you gotten yourself into, Izumi?" she asked herself. Despite the bleak environment that had become her new normal, Sayuri was able to fall asleep rather easily. Like most nights, she would not be spending it alone. For the past few weeks, Sayuri had been receiving nightly visits from Shizuko in her dreams. The girls would usually be lying on the grass and staring up at the starry sky, and this night was no different. "Your new friends seem nice," said Shizuko. "They shouldn't have come here," said Sayuri. "They're going to end up like all the others. Maybe Hana doesn't know they're here." "She can't be everywhere at once, can she?" "She knows they're here," said Sayuri. "She was watching us the whole time we were at the cliff. I just didn't have the heart to tell them. I didn't know how they would have reacted." "Oh," said Shizuko. The two were uncomfortably silent after that. "Look, it's Orion," said Shizuko, pointing up at the sky. "That one's Ursa Major, Shizuko-chan," said Sayuri. "Remember, Orion looks like a man shooting an arrow, and Ursa Major looks like a bear. If you want to see Orion, you can just make it appear. You have the power to do that here." "Yeah, but where's the fun in that?" asked a smiling Shizuko. "It's because this place isn't real," said Sayuri in a voice she had hoped wasn't loud enough for Shizuko to hear. Shizuko immediately sat up. "You don't like it here?" she asked. The tone of Shizuko's voice showed that what Sayuri had said to her had hurt her feelings. "No, that's not what I meant," said Sayuri, sitting up as well. "It's the only place where I feel safe, and I get to be with you. But we both know that it isn't real. It's just dreams." "It's real enough," said Shizuko. "I can't exist outside in the real world like I used to." "I know," said Sayuri. "I just quote. "You want to know how to stop Hana," said Shizuko. "It's the only thing you think about when you're here." "I'm sorry," said Sayuri. "I know that if we stop Hana, then your soul will pass on and I won't be able to see you anymore." "Is that what you want?" asked Shizuko. "I never want to be apart from you," said Sayuri. "You're my best friend, but still quote. "I don't want anything to happen to you," said Shizuko. "I worry that Hana will change her mind and do something bad." "Don't worry about me, Shizuko-chan," said Sayuri. "Nothing is going to happen to me, but if something does happen, promise me that you won't be sad, okay? I'm not afraid to die." Shizuko drew her knees in and buried her face in them. She then began to cry. "Don't say things like that," she whimpered. "Sorry," replied Sayuri. "Come on, let's count the stars. I'll let you go last, that way you can win." "I don't want Hana to hurt any more people," said Shizuko. "And I want to help you stop her, but I don't know how." "It's okay, we'll figure something out," said Sayuri, before resting her head on Shizuko's shoulder. "Hey, you're bad at remembering the constellations." Shizuko smiled, and even let out a small laugh. Bright and early the next day, the group headed to the Arabashi School for Girls. It had been abandoned for quite some time as the students' desire to stay alive far outweighed their desire to acquire new knowledge. Sayuri could still hear vividly in her mind the sounds of talking and feet stomping along the floor as the group made their way to one of her former classrooms. Just like out in the hall, Sayuri could practically see and hear her former classmates inside the room. Upon entering, Kenji immediately began snapping pictures while Shin scribbled feverishly in his notebook. "Shizuko used to sit here," said Sayuri, before taking a seat at the girl's desk. "She never bothered anyone." Sayuri then trailed off, as she had become completely lost in thought. Kenji immediately began taking photos. "We're going to explore the rest of the school," said Izumi, as she forcefully ushered Kenji and Shin out of the room. "I wasn't done taking pictures," said Kenji as Izumi led the way down the hall. "Sayuri needed time alone," said Izumi. She then looked toward the classroom that Sayuri sat in. "That poor girl, this must be the first time she's been back here in a long time. All those memories must have hit her all at once. Give her time. You can tell that this place doesn't hold many happy memories for her." Many memories of her time spent at that school had ingrained themselves into Sayuri's mind. She cherished some of them, but was also less than fond of a few. One of the memories that usually came to the surface first took place on a day that was like any other. Shizuko was walking down the hall carrying a stack of books. Sayuri happened to be walking down the same hall, but did so from a distance. Shizuko passed by a group of girls. One of them was laughing so hard that she backed right into Shizuko's path. The girls collided, and all of Shizuko's books fell to the floor. "Why don't you watch where you're going?" barked the girl. "I'm sorry," said Shizuko, who immediately began picking her books up off the floor. "Stupid Shizuko," said another one of the girls. "Where are you going anyway to spend more time alone? It's no wonder why you don't have any friends," exclaimed the first girl. While all of this was happening, Sayuri was growing angrier and angrier. She clenched her hand into a fist and took a step toward the group. But the one step would be all Sayuri would take as she immediately froze. "Get out of here, stupid Shizuko," said another girl. As Shizuko hastily departed from the scene, the group of girls laughed as they watched Shizuko leave. Sayuri followed Shizuko to the bathroom. She wasn't sure what she would say to the girl, but she knew she had to say something to make her feel better. The bathroom was empty, but one of the stall doors was closed. It was hard to hear, but Sayuri could hear Shizuko crying inside the stall. Just as she was about to speak, the bathroom door flew open. "Sayuri-chan, we've been looking for you," said Nami, who had entered with Aika. "Hana-chan is waiting for us," said Sayuri. Could hear that the crying had stopped once her name had been announced. In the blink of an eye, Nami and Aika ushered Sayuri out of the bathroom. After reliving the horrible memory, Sayuri left Shizuko's desk and went to the window. Just as it always was, the whole area was shrouded in a thick layer of fog, but Sayuri could see well enough Hana below, casting a most unpleasant glare at her. It was when the girl's eyes met when Sayuri felt a hand come to a rest on her shoulder. She immediately spun around and found Izumi standing behind her. It was clear by the look on Sayuri's face that she had been badly frightened. "I'm sorry," said Izumi. "I called your name but you didn't turn around. I thought something might have been wrong." Sayuri quickly looked back outside, but found Hana was nowhere to be found. The group wrapped up their investigation of the school a short time later and were back on the road. The route the group was traveling was becoming uncomfortably familiar to Sayuri. "Where are we going?" she asked. "The only way to put an end to this is to go straight into the lion's den." "Don't be so dramatic," said Kenji. "We're going to pay a visit to Hana's house." "What?" gasped Sayuri. "No, you can't. How did you find where she lived? It's going to be okay," said Izumi. "We found her student file in the school. We can't go there," said Sayuri. "She'll be angry." "Angrier than this?" asked Kenji, motioning outside to the thick fog covering the city. "It's our only option at this point," said Izumi. "We might find a clue that can lead us to a way to stop Hana." In no time, the group had reached Hana's former home. Though she was frightened by what might happen to the others, Sayuri did agree that some kind of clue might be found in Hana's house, so she chose to join them inside. Fortunately for the group, the front door was left unlocked. There was nothing unusual about the house, but something that was strange were the family pictures. In none of the pictures were Hana, her father, nor mother smiling. They all looked like joy was something quite foreign to them. "Whenever I visited," said Sayuri, "Hana's parents never showed her any kind of affection. Hana was the same. The whole family was always so cold toward one another. They probably liked to look down on the little guy," said Kenji, as he snapped picture after picture. "You said Hana's father was a doctor," said Shin. "Yes," replied Sayuri. Shin began scribbling in his notebook. "Doctors must operate in sterile environments," he said. It would seem that trickled down to the Sakaguchi home. The group headed up the stairs into Hana's room. It was much like Sayuri's room, quite drab for belonging to a high school girl. "Very sterile," said Shin. Izumi and Shin began looking through drawers while Kenji took more pictures. Sayuri did little more than watch. She scanned the room and remembered how very little enjoyment it would bring when she used to spend time there. After finding nothing substantial in Hana's desk, Izumi began searching under Hana's mattress. Shin gave her a quizzical look. "It's where I would hide things when I was a teenager," she said. It wasn't long thereafter when Izumi pulled out a diary. "Anything juicy?" Izumi immediately began reading. After scanning through a few pages, she looked at Sayuri. "Hana, she was a very angry girl, wasn't she?" Sayuri nodded. "What kinds of things are in there?" asked Shin. Izumi began reading one of the pages out loud. "Today Nami and Aika were being loud at lunch. Sayuri could tell they were making me mad. Why didn't she tell them to shut up? Why did I have to be the one to do it? That doesn't help us much," said Shin. Izumi flipped through a few pages, then began reading out loud again. "Why is everyone so stupid? You ask them a question, and they don't know the answer. You tell them to do something, and they don't know how. I wish everyone would just disappear. The world would be a better place if they did." "Are these the types of things girls write in their diaries?" asked Shin. "Only the ones with superiority complexes," replied Izumi. "May I see it?" asked Sayuri. Izumi handed the diary over to Sayuri, who immediately began turning pages. She then read one of the pages out loud. "Mother and father weren't happy with my grades. Big surprise. How are they expecting me to be top of my class with the lack of support they show me? They've thrown me to the wolves and expect me to fend for myself." Sayuri began flipping through more pages. When she settled on one, she began reading aloud. "That little brat Sakura beat me in the archery tournament today. I can't believe it. After she won, it was like in one of those stupid movies. Everyone gathered around her to congratulate her. I bet all those idiots enjoyed knowing it was me she had beaten. I know they're all against me. Every last one of them. They probably hope I'll go to the roof of the school tomorrow and throw myself off it. Maybe I should. It would be a quick way to be free from everything that pisses me off. But why should I leave this place? I'm the only one that truly deserves to be here. I'd rather watch everyone else die before I would ever do such a thing to myself." Sayuri then began flipping through more pages, reading only a few lines before moving to the next. "The rest is pretty much the same," she said. "Nothing that can be of any use. Maybe there's something else in this house that can help us," said Shin. The group left Hana's room and went down the hall. "That's Hana's parents' room," said Sayuri. Without hesitation, Kenji swung the door open. What the group found was something nobody could have expected. Hanging from the ceiling were Hana's mother's and father's lifeless bodies. At the insistence of Shin, the group headed back to the cliff. Shin had made it no secret that he was obsessed with Dr. Nishimura's notes on the place. "I believe there might be something in Nishimura's notes about why this place has become cursed," said Shin. "That might be the key to defeating Hana." "Does he explain the history of this place?" asked Sayuri. "Nishimura did," replied Shin. "Early in the Edo period, this was a bustling port city. Many ships from the west came to trade their goods with Japan, and with those ships came many sailors who had never felt the sensuous touch of a Japanese woman." "There's a miner here," said Izumi. "Watch what you say." Kenji chuckled at the scolding. "Sorry," replied Shin. "Anyway, Dr. Nishimura went through the city's archives and found a lot of information, particularly about this woman named Fujiko, no surname given. She was a young woman when she married a wealthy merchant many years older than her. The two were married for only about a year before the husband died of a sudden illness. Many fingers were pointed at Fujiko, but medical science was lacking during that time, and no one could prove that she had anything to do with her husband's death. She inherited her husband's business and money. A good reason to stay single," said Kenji. "Fujiko became very popular after that with the men of the city," said Shin, who took a quick glance at Izumi, who motioned her head towards Sayuri. "That's all I'll say about that. Fujiko would fall in love some years later with a sailor from abroad. The two quickly married, but they weren't married for long. 6 months into their marriage, the husband died." "How did he die?" asked Sayuri. "Here's where things get interesting," said Shin. "His death was ruled a suicide as Fujiko told the authorities that her husband had leapt from this cliff. This cliff became a very popular place for the hopeless to end their lives after that. Many more people used this spot as a means to commit suicide." "You think it's the spirits of these people that cursed this place?" asked Izumi. "You haven't heard the most interesting thing about this place," said Shin. "All the people who killed themselves at this cliff were men. There were confirmed suicides throughout those years of women, but none of them used this cliff." "What do you think that means?" asked Sayuri. "Nishimura explains," said Shin. "All of the men who died at this cliff were connected to Fujiko. Some were merely associated with her for a few nights, but they all knew her. She used this place to throw men to their deaths," said Kenji. "Forensic science or not, it was obvious to authorities that Fujiko was the one responsible for all these deaths. On one fateful night, they set out to arrest her, But when they got to her home, it was engulfed in flames. "Is that how the story ends?" asked Izumi. "Not quite," said Shin. "It was only a short time later when they found Fujiko standing at this cliff. They told her they knew what she had done. With an unusually calm demeanor, she turned to her accusers. 'There will be one far worse than me,' was the only thing Fujiko said before she leapt to her death." "Was she a witch?" asked Sayuri. "I don't think we'll ever know," replied Shin. By burning down her house, Fujiko made certain that no one would ever find any evidence pertaining to what she was up to. "What a horrible woman," said Izumi. "That was a great story," said Kenji. "But it didn't bring us any closer to figuring out how to stop Hana." "But it's a start," said Shin. "It'll have to do," said Kenji, making his way back to the van. "What do you mean?" asked Izumi. "Yamagata wanted this story wrapped up as quickly as possible," replied Kenji. "I think we have enough, but we haven't found a way to stop Hana," said Shin. "That wasn't our assignment," replied Kenji. "Yes, it would have been nice to put an end to all of this, but we didn't come here for that. We came here to write a story about this place, and now we have enough information to do that. We can't just leave," said Izumi. "You can call Yamagata and tell him yourself," said Kenji. "Oh, that's right, you can't, because we haven't been able to contact the outside world since we got here. There's nothing more we can do here. People won't even open their doors to talk to us. I'd say our investigation has hit a dead end." "What about all these people?" asked Izumi. "What's going to happen to them?" "What about Sayuri?" "I don't know about these people," replied Kenji. "But I do know what we can do about Sayuri. She's coming with us. What do you say, Sayuri-chan? Tokyo, the big city, we can get you a job at the magazine and a place to live." Sayuri immediately began shaking her head. "You can't leave," she said. "She won't let you." "What are you talking about?" asked Kenji, climbing into the van. He then started the engine. "Come on, everyone inside." Shin began making his way to the van, but Izumi grabbed him by the arm and stopped him. "Don't go," she said. "Kenji brings up a good point," said Shin. "Our only assignment was to gather information so that we could write our story about this place. If anything, more exposure for this place could lead to a way to put an end to Hana." "We can't let all these people die," said Izumi. "There's really nothing more we can do to help them," said Shin. And with that he made his way to the van and climbed into the back seat. "If we leave now, we can get back to Tokyo before midnight," said Kenji. Izumi began shaking her head. "We can't leave yet," she said. "Suit yourself," said Kenji. "I'll send someone to pick you up in a couple of days." To everyone's surprise, Kenji then put the van in drive and drove away. "He's leaving," said a wide-eyed Izumi. Shin was just as surprised as Izumi was. "Are we really going to just leave them back there like that?" he asked. "No," replied Kenji, grinning from ear to ear. "I'm just putting a little scare into them. I'm going to turn right around. They'll trip over their own feet trying to get back to the van. You'll see." "The art of psychology," said Shin. Kenji drove a few blocks away before turning the van around and heading back to the girls. Shin's heart sank when he found a girl in a school uniform now sitting beside him. He began shaking horribly and could barely muster the ability to speak. "Hana?" he said. Hana flashed a fiendish grin at Shin before turning her attention to Kenji. "Such a naughty boy," she said. "You're trying to take my Sayuri away." It was evident by the look on his face that Kenji was terrified by the arrival of the unexpected passenger. He gripped the wheel so tightly that his fingers turned bright red and he unintentionally applied far too much pressure to the accelerator. Hana then placed her hand on Kenji's shoulder. "Hey Kenji-kun, don't turn around." Sayuri and Izumi watched as the van sped by, then crashed into a car that had been abandoned on the road. Both vehicles exploded in a blinding ball of fire. Izumi made no hesitation before running toward the van. "Izumi-chan, no!" shouted Sayuri. The heat from the explosion was far too much to bear and Izumi was forced to keep her distance. Tears began to fill her eyes as she backed away from the carnage. "Why?" she whimpered. "Izumi!" screamed a horrified Sayuri. As she backed away from the carnage, Izumi was forced to come to an abrupt halt when she backed into someone. "Hey, Izumi-chan," said Hana, before placing her hand on Izumi's shoulder. "Don't turn around." When Izumi made the horrendous mistake of turning around, she immediately crumpled to the ground, the life completely drained from her. "Izumi-chan," screamed Sayuri. From out of nowhere, a hand came to rest on Sayuri's shoulder. "They shouldn't have tried to take you away from me," said Hana. "The nerve of some people. This is never going to end, is it?" asked Sayuri, tears now falling from her eyes. "Why would I end this when there are still so many people that deserve to die?" asked Hana. "Those three actually thought they could find a way to stop me." Hana then walked around Sayuri so the two could look each other in the eye. "I think I humored them for long enough, don't you?" "Why don't you just take me?" asked Sayuri. "That would put an end to this. You'll have your revenge." "Sayuri-chan, we've been over this so many times already." You'll die only after I've killed everyone. Therefore you should consider yourself the luckiest person on earth. No harm can come to you until I've had my fill. I know how to stop you, said Sayuri. Hana immediately began laughing. No you don't, she replied. If you knew how to stop me, you would have done it by now. I know you too well to know you wouldn't hesitate. Hana then made her way behind Sayuri again. Sayuri-chan, you shouldn't try to make new friends. Some of us are supposed to be alone. When Sayuri spun around to face Hana, her one-time friend was nowhere to be found. Sayuri went home after the horrific events she had witnessed. It took her hours of tossing and turning, but she was eventually able to fall asleep. Like most other nights, Sayuri dreamt of Shizuko. The two were again lying on a grassy field looking up at the stars. But unlike most other nights where the girls would engage in some kind of conversation, tonight the two were silent. After having endured enough silence, Shizuko spoke. I'm sorry about what happened to your friends, she said. They didn't deserve to die. None of the people that Hana has killed deserve to die, replied Sayuri. There was an uncomfortable silence after that. Why was I left behind? Sayuri asked abruptly. It's not just for Hana to show me what she's doing. She's showing me just how weak I really am. You're not weak, Sayuri-chan, said Shizuko, sitting up. You're the strongest person I know. Tears began to fall from Sayuri's eyes. Then why do I just stand there and do nothing when Hana is killing all these people? How is that strong? Shizuko was unable to respond. Sayuri sat up and wiped her tears away. But the more tears she wiped, the more began to fall. You're still here, said Shizuko. What? Asked Sayuri. You're still here, said Shizuko. You haven't tried to run away or hide from Hana. You've faced her head-on. Only someone who's strong could do that. I don't feel strong, said Sayuri. Hana's taken everything from me. She took my mom and dad. She took you. And whenever I'm near her I freeze like a scared child. Being strong doesn't require power, said Shizuko. Sometimes being strong is knowing when to make tough choices, even if we don't want to make them. Shizuko-chan, said Sayuri. A smile formed on Shizuko's lips as tears began to well up in her eyes. Promise me something, Sayuri-chan, she said. What is it? Asked Sayuri. You won't ever forget me. Of course I won't forget you, said Sayuri, sounding as if such a thing need not ever be asked. Shizuko stood up and began walking away from Sayuri. When she looked back, she motioned for her friend to follow. Sayuri did as Shizuko wanted. But as she did, the grassy field began to change into the cliffside where the seemingly never-ending nightmare had begun. The sky, once brimming with stars, was now glowing orange as the sun began to rise in the distance. The last time I came to this place before that day was with my parents to watch the sunset, said Shizuko. I didn't know it then, but my parents already knew about my mother's diagnosis. I just couldn't understand why they were crying as they looked out at something so beautiful. I watch that memory a lot in here. Your parents were always so kind to me, said Sayuri, a smile on her face. They adored you, said Shizuko. They would always become so happy when you came to visit. I never had any other friends. Shizuko gently bumped her hand against Sayuri's, prompting her friend to hold it. You were always the only real friend I ever had, Shizuko-chan, said Sayuri. You never had to pretend to be nice to me, nor did you ever ask for anything, and still It's okay, Sayuri-chan. You were the best friend I ever could have asked for. The girls then watched through teary eyes the sun rising over the horizon. I'm sorry, said Shizuko. For what? Asked Sayuri. For being a bad friend, replied Shizuko. Don't say that, Shizuko-chan, said Sayuri. I have been a bad friend, replied Shizuko. I've been selfish. I was afraid of losing you, so I kept a secret. Secret? Asked Sayuri. You were never supposed to be here, Sayuri-chan. This place, it was made only for me. But I wanted to see you again, so I let you in. But that's not the secret. As tears began to flow more rapidly from Shizuko's eyes, so too did more tears begin to fall fast from Sayuri's. You can tell me, said Sayuri. We'll always be friends, right, Sayuri-chan? Asked Shizuko. Of course we will, replied Sayuri. Shizuko pulled her hand free from Sayuri and tightly embraced her friend. Never forget me, she said. Bright and early the next morning, Sayuri made her way back to the cliff. Like her dream with Shizuko, the sun was ever so slowly making its way up over the horizon. You're up early, said Hana, who now stood a few yards behind Sayuri. Ready for another day of watching helplessly as I bring this world to its knees? I honestly used to think we were friends, said Sayuri. You'd always act so cold to me, but I just thought that's how you were. But as time went by, I realized you didn't like me at all. You just didn't want to be alone. You were afraid. Afraid? Asked Hana. An interesting theory, but you couldn't be more wrong. You see, I could have chosen anyone to be my friend, but I chose you. Nami and Aika were easy choices. They would have done anything to make me happy. But you were always going to be a challenge, but I knew I could make you obedient. You were right about one thing though, said Sayuri. Oh, asked Hannah. I did use you, explained Sayuri. I didn't want to be alone, but not because it would have made me like Shizuko, like you said it would have. I could never be like her. Shizuko was the most kind person I had ever met. She never would have rejected me in the way that I rejected her. How touching, remarked Hannah. Hey Sayuri-chan, would you like to hear a secret? Those reporter friends of yours, they made me stronger. Their fear wasn't like the fear of the people in this city. It was fresh. They were still full of hope, not empty like the rest of these people. I'm nearly strong enough to leave this place. Soon I'll be able to kill whoever I want, wherever I want. If you'd like, I can make the TVs work again, or bring back the internet. That way you can see just what I'm capable of doing. We went to your house yesterday, said Sayuri. You think I don't know that? There's nothing you can do that I won't know about. We found your parents, said Sayuri. My parents were weak, said Hannah. They couldn't handle the shame of having a daughter that was dead. That's not why they did what they did. Of course it was. You think they did what they did because their hearts were broken? You didn't know them the way I knew them. Me dying just made them resent me even more. They might not have been very good at showing their emotions, said Sayuri. But they did love you. Hannah began laughing. You think deep down inside everyone is good, don't you? Like there's not a rotten apple in this bunch. I don't think that, said Sayuri. I read your diary. There isn't a trace of humanity in you. You were a monster long before you became what you are now. Now there's something we can agree on. And I'm going to show you just how much of a monster I am. I'm not going to let you, said Sayuri. You must be joking, said Hannah. Look around you. Can you not tell that I've already won? I suppose you think there's some kind of magic spell that can stop me. Is that why you're here? Are you going to try to push me off the cliff again? It won't do anything. I already died. You can't kill me again. Sayuri then thought back to the dream she had had the previous night and the words that Shizuko had spoken to her. There's only one way to stop Hannah, said Shizuko's voice ever so vividly in Sayuri's mind. I won't ever forget you, Shizuko-chan, whispered Sayuri. With tears forming in her eyes, Sayuri placed her hand over her heart and fell backward off the edge of the cliff. Months had passed and people had done their best to get back to their normal lives. The fog, which had mysteriously rolled in one day, had just as mysteriously disappeared. And the girl who wore a school uniform and had taken so many innocent lives seemed to have disappeared with it. The cleanup process was the most difficult part. Numerous dead bodies were strewn across the city. Some were young, some were old, but all had deserved a far kinder fate than the one they had ultimately met. One body in particular was especially heartbreaking to find. A girl locals would eventually identify as Sayuri Igarashi had been found dead on the rocks beneath a seaside cliff, much in the way Shizuko Harada had been discovered a few months prior. With a little investigating, it was discovered that the two had attended the same school. But after more digging, it was found that they had been friends. Any further connections were never made, as Sayuri's case was quickly closed and ruled a suicide. More journalists would come to cover the story of just what had happened in the place once dubbed the Dead City. They would all tell mostly the same story the government had force-fed them. A mere raise in temperatures had created the perfect conditions for the blanket of fog, and mass hysteria had created visions of a girl in a school uniform. In some cases, the hysteria was so great that people's hearts suddenly stopped beating. The government would give no more information than that. Super Unexplainable Paranormal saw a boost in readership, as 3 of their finest journalists had lost their lives while covering the story. Kenji and Shin's deaths were easily explained as they had died in a car crash. Azumi's death, however, was reported to have happened due to a heart attack after witnessing the horrific accident. Though the harrowing events were now part of the city's history, it was still not yet free from the unexplained. As hard as they had tried, the citizens of this unassuming city by the sea would never be able to forget what had happened, as more and more of them would report seeing a mysterious girl appearing from seemingly out of nowhere. She struck a startling resemblance to one Sayuri Igarashi. Some said the sightings were nothing more than rumors, while others even claimed to have had encounters with her. One thing that every encounter had in common was that the person visited was suffering a great sadness, but the severity of the sadness was suddenly lessened, and sometimes even replaced with hope, when they felt a hand gently come to a rest upon their shoulder. Thank you for watching, guys. If you enjoyed this telling story video, please do not forget to give us a like, comment, share, and subscribe.